The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll give everyone a few minutes to filter in and get started shortly. All right, well, thank you for joining us today for this February 11th MSIP meeting. Before we get started, I wanted to go over just a few technical logistics. All attendees will be muted for a majority of the webinar. At times, you may be prompted to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. You will be unmuted and remuted by an organizer in that time. To submit questions for speakers, enter your question in the questions dropdown on your control panel. The American Institutes for Research allows for the recording of audio, visual, participants, and other information sent, verbalized, or utilized during business-related meetings. By joining a meeting, you automatically consent to such recordings. Any participant who prefers to participate via audio only should disable their video camera so only their audio will be captured. Video and/or audio recordings of any AAR session shall not be transmitted to an external third party without the permission. So just keep in mind, you don't have to worry about your video being recorded, but do keep it in mind if you decide to raise your hand and share your audio at any point. And you can access the recording of this webinar on the MSIP page on our Ideas That Work website. The link is in the chat. And now I will go ahead and hand it over to Greg Kaur, the Director of MSIP.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a gray, dreary day here in Washington, but we've got an exciting call lined up for you, so thanks for joining us. We've got three topics. First, we have Dave Phillips from our Center on IDEA Fiscal Reporting, CIFER. And Dave will be sharing some basic information about CIFER, but more specific resources about state MFS and local MOE, maintenance of fiscal support and maintenance of effort. Jennifer Finch then from our own fiscal team here in Osep will be providing information on Esser funds and IDEA, and especially as they relate to MFS and MOE. And then as we referenced in the call reminder that went out earlier this week, today we'll share some important information about some shifts that we are making in the implementation of DMS 2.0 for the remainder of this program year. And Matt Schneer and Kate Moran will be providing the lion's share of that presentation. So that's what we've got queued up today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that I will be sending you an email that includes a Survey Monkey link. In the survey, we'll be asking you to provide the names and contact information for parent in your office. And we'll be asking for web links for state-specific IDEA information that's appropriate for parents. And we did this a few years ago, and it was really helpful. This information will help us as we field calls and emails from parents in your state. It's just a few questions. It should only take a couple minutes to complete and submit the survey. So I thank you in advance for your time in completing this. It should come out later today or tomorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to turn our call over to Dave Phillips from CIFER. Dave?
Great, thanks very much, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Dave Phillips. I'm the director of the Center for IDEA Fiscal Reporting. Grateful to have a few minutes today with everyone just to share some of the resources that we have available for maintenance of state financial support, or MFS, and local educational agency maintenance of effort, or LEA MOE. If you can go to the next slide, please. To set the context for these resources and also to help as sort of a preamble to Jennifer Finch's presentation here in a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do. Most importantly today is to make sure that everyone understands how they can engage Cipher to assist with LEA, MOE, and MFS requirements, as well as the other areas in our scope. And then I'll review quickly how you can access right now MFS and LEA MOE resources from our website. Next slide, please. So what we do, Cipher assists states to improve the quality of collection, reporting, analysis, and use of IDEA, Part B, and Part C fiscal data. We just started a new cooperative agreement as a technical assistance center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs in October for our new center for the next 5 years. Many of you from the Part B side know us from the last 6 years of work that we've done supporting Part B programs. We're very excited with this new cooperative agreement for the next 5 years to also be able to support Part C programs in this work. If you can go to the next slide, please. Our scope is very specific for Part B and Part C, and this helps us to be enthusiastic collaborators with our other TA partners around the IDEA fiscal requirements, specifically the National Center for Systemic Improvement for Part B, as well as the IDEA Data Center. And then for Part C, we also work hand in hand, or are starting to develop the relationships to work hand in hand with ECTA and DAISY. So the requirements that we cover for Part B are maintenance of state financial support, again, MFS, allocation of IDEA Part B subgrants to LEAs, LEA maintenance of effort, and the fiscal requirements associated with coordinated early intervening services, data collection, and reporting. For Part C, we are supporting areas specific to Sections 3 and 4 of the Part C annual grant applications, specifically around indirect cost and cost allocation plan information, as well as the use of funds reporting. Next slide, please. In all those areas we support, we work on 3 main areas: expanding state knowledge of the fiscal requirements, which we hope to helps lead to increased state capacity to collect, report, analyze, and ultimately use the information that's collected for Part B and Part C around fiscal requirements. And we help memorialize that capacity through improved state infrastructure. And specifically what we work on with states is developing policies and procedures. We have developed many tools and resources for Part B and are starting the process of developing those for Part C that we can then customize working with our TA liaisons for any one specific state program context, helping SEAs and lead agencies develop training systems to support the local agencies around the reporting requirements, and then also helping SEAs and lead agencies make sure to identify the relationships they need both within their agencies as well as with other agencies to meet the reporting requirements. Next slide, please. So the main thing as a takeaway from today in the time that we have is to make sure that folks understand you can engage the Center for IDEA Fiscal Reporting right now. For both Part B and Part C, we have established state TA liaisons. Those folks are your primary contact and conduit to engaging Cipher and making sure we can provide the full suite of services that we have available. And I'll talk in a few minutes through our website how you can identify and contact your state liaison if you haven't heard from them already. In addition to our state liaisons, we have communities of practice. We've just launched 4 for Part C. Those started in January. We'll be launching MFS and LEA MOE communities of practice for Part B here in the very near future. We've also launched our listservs for Part C and Part B. These are closed communities that consist of the Part B and Part C independently of our Cipher TA providers, as well as agency staff with IDEA fiscal responsibilities. It's a great place to disseminate information as well as to share with your colleagues about current challenges associated with fiscal requirements. We'll also be launching a number of fiscal webinar series, the first of which just occurred last Friday on maintenance of state financial support. We'll be continuing to hold IDEA fiscal forums virtually, and then hopefully sooner than later, as we all work through this pandemic, face-to-face again, and look forward to having those opportunities to create the space for states and TA providers to work together on solving common challenges. And then finally, you can engage us right now on our website, and that's what I'm going to close here, is just showing a few of the resources we have available specific to MFS and LEA MOE. Next slide, please. Out of a surfeit of paranoia from sharing my screen on webinars like this, this isn't the live website, although it is live now. These are screenshots of what we have available. So if you go to cipher.wested.org, this is what you'll see right now. The general information that we just talked about who we are and what we do. Going from left to right, we have information about us, a news feed, an events feed, a resource catalog, and a contact us. And from the contact us page, if you go to the next slide, please. This is how you can reach out to us directly with your state liaison. So if you identify your state, click on that state and it'll immediately pull down your Part B state TA liaisons and Part C state TA liaisons, and you can reach out to those folks immediately and they'll get back to you within a business day. So that's again, I'll just flag that this is the thing to remember about engaging us. You can do this right now. And next slide, please. So you can work with your state TA liaison or go to the website, and if you wanted to find information on a maintenance of state financial support, in our resource catalog, we have a maintenance of state financial support section. When you click there, you'll be taken to a number of resources that are a carefully curated list of all the information you essentially need to understand the requirements and to collect and report the information. Next slide, please. Within that resource catalog for MFS, the main tool that folks should hit first is the Maintenance of State Financial Support Toolkit. This sort of has everything you need, soup to nuts, to understand what's needed to meet the MFS reporting requirements. Our quick reference guide and funding flow ideograph tool, to use a college class metaphor, like a 101 level introduction to the IDEA fiscal requirements around MFS. They're particularly valuable. The quick reference guide is particularly valuable to share with new staff within your agency. It's also been effective for us working with states to present to legislative committees as well as executive branch agency policymakers about understanding the MFS fiscal requirements. Funding flow ideograph tool, you can work with us to design a picture of what your current special education funding flows look like. Again, a picture worth 1,000 words to help folks understand the MFS requirement in the context of your current funding system. And then at the sort of the 300, 400 level materials, the timeline development tool and the data collection and reporting tools are designed specifically for the folks in your agency that have the responsibility of collecting and reporting the maintenance of state financial support information. And again, you can engage us to help walk through any of these tools as needed. So that's the place to start for MFS. Next slide. You can go back to our resource catalog. And then if you were to hit the resource catalog and pull down to LEA MOE, next slide, please. We have a similar resource here called our LEA MOE Organizer. And this has all the information you need to begin to collect and report high quality LEA MOE information. So we have information from the eligibility standard in the spring, generally the compliance standard in the fall, generally all the way through reporting information to Osep. So any one of these boxes below, if you click on federal requirements or state procedures or 4 methods for calculating MOE, will highlight all the resources that are associated, not all the resources, a carefully curated set of resources associated with these areas. Next slide, please. So as an example, if you click on budgeting federal requirements, it has a comprehensive listing of the associated federal requirements. And then next slide, please. This would be scrolling down the page. In addition to the regulations, we also have Osep resources, as well as other TA Center resources that are available. And we do this for each element of the LEA MOE data collection and reporting process. And it's fairly comprehensive. At the same time, it's curated, so there's not a lot of extra information that you have to sort through. So those are 2 areas that are available right now for folks around maintenance of state financial support and LEA MOE. And again, you can go to the Contact Us page and identify your state TA liaison and reach out to them, and they'll get right back. On our next slide, just a couple other things for folks to be aware of specific to LEA, MOE, and MFS. Coming up on February 19th, we have an MFS open door session as a follow-up to the webinar we just held on February 5th. If you were not able to attend the February 5th session, you're certainly more than welcome to join us on February 19th. We'll have our Cypher experts here to help answer state questions that they bring in an open door format to discuss. And then on March 5th, we'll have a webinar on LEA MOE and a similar follow-up on March 19th in a format of an open door session. And then we'll also be launching our communities of practice on MFS and LEA MOE problem solving in the near future. So stay tuned for those announcements. Last slide. Thank you. So again, you can contact us, go to our website, and you can identify your state liaison or email me directly or email our center directly at cypher_info@wested.org. And that's what I have for today. Really appreciate folks' time, and I look forward to hearing from everyone. And with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Jennifer Finch.
All right, there I am. All right. Thank you so much. Let me get my presentation here. And thanks, Dave, for just reviewing the available resources that Cypher offers, as well as the tools that are available to assist with LEA MOE and maintenance of financial support. We can move on to the next slide. All right, as you can see from the title slide and from the agenda, we'll be discussing today the Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, also known as the Esser Fund. We'll also discuss the Esser Fund as it impacts IDEA, particularly as it relates to maintenance of financial support, or MFS, and local education agency maintenance of effort, LEA MOE. And so for the rest of the presentation, I will refer to these by their acronyms: Esser, MFS, and LEA MOE. Next slide, please. All right, Esser was established under the Education Stabilization Fund in the CARES Act to address the needs and the impact of the coronavirus pandemic nationwide. The Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 was signed into law on December 27th, 2020, and this provided an additional $54.3 billion with a B dollars to the Esser 2 fund. So these funds are available to the 50 states and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. However, the Bureau of Indian Education, the BIE, and outlying areas are not eligible to receive Esser funds. However, Congress provided a separate set aside in the Education Stabilization Fund to provide additional funds to those entities. Next slide, please. So ESSER funds can be used for any allowable purposes under IDEA. Some examples of this that we have seen are states making reference to these funds for what they are calling recovery services for children with disabilities. And we also see where states use these funds to provide compensatory services to students with disabilities as well. And ESSER funds are available for obligation until September 30th, 2022 and 2023, respectively. Next slide, please. Okay, so in a meeting with stakeholders, Osap became aware and also concerned that not all SEAs and LEAs are thinking about how ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds can be used to support recovery services and to accelerate the learning for children with disabilities. So we do plan on issuing guidance in the near future. However, in the meantime, we would like to engage with you around the ESSER funds. We want to hear from you. We want to and welcome your questions and your feedback. OSEP values your support and looks forward to learning about your experiences using ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds. So of course, this is an optional request, but if you would like to engage with us, please feel free to reach out to your OSEP fiscal team. And the contact information is available on the second to last slide of this presentation. Next slide. So, as I stated earlier, ESSER funds can be used for allowable purposes under IDEA, but we wanted to make you aware that of the interaction between MFS, LEA, MOE, and ESSER funds. So under ESSA, the ESSER fund does not contain a supplanting prohibition. So as a result, for certain programs, ESSER funds may take the place of state and local funds for allowable activities. Under IDEA, however, this flexibility does not exist. So under IDEA, neither state or local funds can be replaced by ESSER funds in the calculations for MFS and for LEA MOE. So for the purposes of these calculations, they are counted as federal funds. So because of this, we wanted to remind states of the requirements for MFS and LEA MOE under IDEA. Next slide, please. Okay, so on your screen, there is the maintenance of financial support, the regulation, which I won't read. I'm pretty sure we all know this by heart. But basically, states are required under IDEA to make available at least the same amount of state financial support from 1 year to the next for the education of children with disabilities. Next slide. So we do grant waivers for MFS, but only when a state demonstrates that it has experienced exceptional or uncontrollable circumstances. And those words are taken directly from the regulation. If a waiver is granted, the statute contains several protections to ensure appropriate services continue to be provided for children with disabilities. So states then must continue to ensure that FAPE is made available to students residing in the state. Additionally, if the department grants a waiver, the amount of financial support required of the state in future years is the same amount that would have been required in the absence of a waiver. So if you have concerns that your state may not meet MFS, please reach out. You can reach out to your OSEP state lead or to your fiscal implementation team. I would also encourage you to use the Cypher tools, especially to educate your policymakers and your legislators on the requirements and the consequences of failure for MFS. So Dave also talked about earlier, referenced the quick reference guide, and that is particularly used, to educate policymakers and legislators for this purpose. Next slide. So we haven't received many waiver requests in the past. However, the waiver requests that we have received can be found on our website, as well as details regarding the waiver process. So feel free to visit that website should you have any questions or require additional information. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about LEA MOE. As I stated earlier, under IDEA, neither state and local funds can be replaced by Esser funds in the calculations for MFS and LEA MOE, and that is worth repeating twice, right? So what this means is that if an LEA or an SEA uses Esser funds to replace state or local funds, they will be negatively impacting their MFS levels and LEA MOE levels. So as with the MFS requirement, the LEA requirement is still in effect. And as you know, there are two components to the LEA MOE requirement, the eligibility standard and the compliance standard. So not to go into too much detail, but the eligibility standard describes the MOE requirement that an LEA must meet as a condition of receiving an IDEA Part B grant. When reviewing an LEA's application for an IDEA Part B subgrant, the SEA must determine that the LEA budgets for the education of children with disabilities at least the same amount as the LEA spent for that purpose from the same source in the most recent fiscal year for which information is available, subject to the subsequent year's rule. That felt like a tongue twister. And then the second component, the compliance standard, is an expenditure test, okay? And the test is done to determine whether an LEA in fact met the requirements to maintain effort in a particular fiscal year. The compliance standard prohibits LEAs from reducing the level of expenditures from local or state and local funds for the education of children with disabilities below the level of expenditures made by the LEA for that purpose from the same source for the preceding year. So in a nutshell, LEAs must maintain or increase the amount of local or state and local funds it spends for the education of children with disabilities when compared to the preceding year. And as you know, there are exceptions, and those can be found at 300-204 and 300-205. Next slide, please. So again, we won't go into the details of LEA MOE here. Dave highlighted some particular resources that would be especially helpful to you. And I recall the LEA MOE organizer that's very useful in tracking and organizing all this information. And we do also have additional information available on our website, as well as previous presentations on LEA MOE, as well as guidance that we've issued. All right, next slide. So I would also direct your questions, should you have any or require follow-up, to your fiscal team. And the contact information is on the screen. If you don't know your fiscal team, and if you're not familiar with how to contact them, feel free to get that information from this presentation. Next slide. And again, you can feel free to contact any of our Osep funded TA centers. Both the NCSI and Cypher are available to support you in these areas. But Dave just went through and highlighted their carefully curated available resources and tools that I'm sure you'd find very helpful, and that I have worked with states in using these tools as well. So I want to thank you for your time, and it looks like we are about at my stopping point. So I will turn my presentation over to Greg.
Thank you, Jennifer. And there I am back on the screen. That was really helpful. I know those are questions that a lot of states have as they've started kind of thinking more deeply about the impact of these additional funds that are available. So we are now going to move to the third part of our call. Consistent with the priorities of the Biden administration, we will be focusing our efforts on activities related to safely reopening schools for students with disabilities and resuming in-person early intervention services for our infants and toddlers with disabilities. We know that reopening schools and resuming EI services are critical for the children and families that you serve. And we want to do everything we can to support you in this effort. Although we remain committed to DMS 2.0, this shift will mean that this year will look differently than we had originally envisioned. During today's call, we'll begin to provide details for what this pivot means to you and to your state. Now I would like to introduce David Cantrell, who is the acting director for Osep. David will kick off this portion of today's call with a few words about the pivot of our DMS system. David.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd also like to thank Dave Phillips and Jennifer Finch for their presentation. I think now, as we all know, with the additional funding coming from our office, additional guidance and clarification regarding how those funds can be used for serving infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities, it's very timely. So please let us know how we can further provide support to you. So as Greg said, we are launching into a pivot of the DMS 2.0 rollout. Let me be clear, we are not stopping the monitoring process. However, as Greg said, in response to the President's executive order, plus conversations we've had with NASD, ITCA, and many of you, to include the feedback we've received from you contacting our state leads, we've decided to pivot the DMS 2.0 rollout for the balance of this fiscal year. So you may be wondering, why are we doing this? Well, for one, we are doing this in response to what your immediate needs are. We know each of you are challenged with not only opening the schools and getting students back into a brick and mortar setting, but also the challenges of identifying educators, support staff, and other support personnel that are able to come into the schools and work with students in a safe and healthy environment. This pivot has the support of our Secretary's office. Last week, Dr. Kaur, Greg, and I, we briefed our acting Secretary as well as the Chief of Staff. They very much agreed in this direction that is very responsive, and we hope that you see that is responsive to the feedback that you're giving to us on an ongoing basis. Yesterday, we did have a presentation with our technical assistance centers, also giving them the heads up of this pivot and eliciting their support so that they are responsive immediately and ongoing throughout this year to your specific needs for support and guidance. Additionally, we're in the position of teeing up additional written guidance to you in response to the pandemic so that we can provide you timely and accurate guidance that you need now to get students back into the school and further clarify the understandings of IDA and the flexibilities of the funding as well to support you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and Kate to provide additional details regarding the pivot. But lastly, let me say to you, we do want this to be a collaborative, responsive process, as I said. We have plans to speak with the NASD board in a couple weeks and following up with the ITCA board as well. So please don't hesitate to contact your state lead, let them know how if you have any suggestions to this pivot, but also if you have any specific suggestions or requests for clarification from our office. We're all in this together, and I hope that We continue to hear from you, and you have my promise that we will be responsive to your requests. Thank you. And Matt, turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, David. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to David for the support that he's been giving us as we try to address the challenges that we all are facing, and certainly you all are facing out there in the field. It's been terrific to work with David as he's moved into this new role. So as David has mentioned, we are making some changes to DMS activities for the remainder of the year. And I want to note that what we're going to provide today is an overview of where we are going, and we will be providing more details as we move forward. Particularly, put on your calendar, if it's not on already, the DMS National TA call that's scheduled for February 25th, when we'll have more information on this, as we'll mention before. You see here that what we're going to cover today is a little bit more about the issue, the executive order, what we see the pivot activities being, how we're still committed to DMS 2.0, a little bit specifically about the impact on cohort 1 states, and then Kate's going to walk us through some information that gives you sort of more information on the schedule, both immediately and long-term around DMS, a DMS roadmap. Next slide, please. Okay, so the issue is something that we're all familiar with. We know that the pandemic is obviously still raging out there, and that it has a huge impact on the population that we all serve, infant, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities, and their families. We have 450,000 plus Americans that have lost their lives. You can see it there on the screen, some information about just a little bit of data about what the impact has been on how the difficulty of providing services to our children with disabilities and their families under these circumstances. These are things that I don't have to tell you about because you know so much more about them than we do. And we know that despite the promise of vaccines, there are formidable challenges remaining in providing early intervention services, preschool services, and special education related services to all the children with disabilities. So with that in mind, next slide, please. We also want to note that President Biden, shortly after he took office, issued the executive order that you see here on the screen. And in that executive order, he called on all of us to do a number of things, but here are some 4 of the bulleted points that we want to make clear. We need to create conditions for safe in-person learning as quickly as possible, ensure high-quality instruction, delivery of essential services, mitigate learning loss caused by the pandemic, or learning recovery, as I've also heard about. And we know that the pandemic has just highlighted the existing disparities and inequities out there, and we need to pay attention to how that is working. One thing to note is that while the executive order and much of what you hear focuses very much to a large extent on school-age services, we know that it's equally important that we focus on our youngest children that we serve, the infants and toddlers and the kids in preschool. So we want to pay attention to those as well. So our DMS pivot activities that we'll talk briefly about today are designed to support all of these goals. Next slide, please. So what we have in mind in terms of DMS pivot activities is many of you are aware that in the fall, our office undertook an initial review of state COVID-19 policies. And through that review, we identified some issues that we will want to follow up with states on. And we intend to continue our review of those policies and other policies that are relevant, engage in monthly calls with you around these policies and your efforts to ensure that all of the required services under IDEA are being provided in accordance with IDEA. We know that some of the issues around that are not just in policies, but in how they're being implemented. So we'll be interested in talking to you, and this is consistent with what we've been saying about DMS, about how you are fulfilling your responsibilities of general supervision in working with your local programs to ensure all of this is being done. We also, as David mentioned, we are reviewing our existing guidance. You should look forward to upcoming opportunities to hear about the Q&A documents that we have already issued, as well as we are looking to new guidance that needs to be issued on other issues as appropriate. So look forward to that. We also will be collaborating, in MSIP, we'll be collaborating with our fellow members of Osep in our sister office, the Research to Practice office that works with our Osep funded TA centers. So we'll be collaborating both with RTP and TA providers to identify the types of supports, the types of materials, the types of help that is needed to help support you in your efforts, not only in being compliant to IDA, but addressing the many challenges that are out there as students return to school, as services return to the home, how to address the impact of the pandemic on all of our children, whether it's learning loss, whether it's emotional issues or behavioral issues. These are all very important. And as Dave mentioned, we're committed to doing this in collaboration with our stakeholders, which includes you, as well as parents and other groups out there. So we're going to be trying to find ways to get your feedback and how to make this process moving forward. As I've mentioned, this is just a brief overview of what those activities will be, and we'll be providing many more details on this moving forward, and you certainly are welcome to start conversations with your state leads around this. Next slide, please. So we also want to highlight that we are committed still to DMS 2.0. First of all, throughout this pivot, we're maintaining our responsibility to ensure accountability towards IDA, and that will be part of the focus of what we're talking about with you, as well as providing the support that is necessary. Specifically to DMS 2.0, we will be working on a parallel track to finalize all the materials and procedures, prepare for monitoring activities that will start again in October of 21. I know there have been many questions about when the next set of protocols are coming out. We're still working to get those available to you so that you can utilize them to prepare yourself for upcoming DMS activities, use them as universal TA and other types of things. So look forward to that. We will continue with the stakeholder engagement activities that I've mentioned, and we will continue to hold universal technical assistance calls that will cover topics both related to our DMS and the general supervision components that we've talked about, as well as specific needs related to the current pandemic. Next slide, please. So for those of you in cohort 1, you're probably trying to figure out what this really means for you. So I want to try to talk a little bit about that. So as you know, we have been working on fiscal management activities, looking at protocols for Part C on single line of responsibility, for Part B on subrecipient monitoring, and your state leads and fiscal contacts have been engaging with you on that. With all of our states, we have either come to almost a close of that or finalizing the last pieces of those activities. So we are going to bring that to a close. You will be, once that is done, you will receive an email from your state leads that will talk about how we're finalizing that. And if there are areas of any concern or areas of non-compliance, you will be copied under separate cover to address how we're going to follow up on that. We will also, throughout this period, continue to provide both universal and targeted TA on any areas of need identified through phase 1 activities. So to the extent that we've identified any patterns of issues that we want to bring to the attention of all states, we'll provide that through universal TA. If there are specific issues that have been identified through the monitoring activities, of phase 1 monitoring activities so far, we will continue to provide the necessary TA on that throughout this period. And then we look to, in the fall of 2021, to resume phase 1 DMS activities for cohort 1 states by starting with the working on the other 7 components of the general supervision framework. So what this means in effect is that the original timeline for completing the monitoring will be delayed a year, because next year we will be doing phase 1 with our cohort 1 states, completing that process. In the following year, 2022-23, we will move on to phase 2 with cohort 1 states and begin phase 1 with cohort 2 states, et cetera. And you're going to get a chance to see some visuals that Kate will share with you about this just in a moment. Also want to note, and Kate will also mention this, that we're going to be working to set up a specific call with cohort 1 states to just go over this in a little bit more detail. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Kate. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Matt. Well, thanks everyone once again for joining us today. I do want to leave time for questions at the end, so I'll move through this information with some speed so that we can allow time for questions, but please know that this will be posted. It is in the handouts, so you can refer to it at any time. We have put together kind of an overarching logic model that you see here of what DMS, our vision, our mission for OSAP, and then what DMS 2.0 is about. So you can see we've got our drivers and inputs of SPP, APR, our grant, that's all flowing into our DMS activities that the processes then carry out over 3 phases, all of that leading to our long-term impact of improved outcomes and results for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. So next slide, please. And just click it again. Our 8 puzzle pieces will come up. There we go. So this slide is probably not a is probably very familiar to you. It is our 8 key components that we see as integral to a state's general supervision system. We'll be looking at them separately during our DMS process, but putting them all together makes up your state's general supervision system. So we just wanted to highlight that. Again, as we go into the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you a larger 80,000 foot view, if you will, of what this will look like. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So over the next 8 years, you can see here we're in year 1. We're going to be focusing on this school reopening and pandemic support. We're going to be getting those protocols ready, posted up on the website, and providing you with universal TA and support around those. So that as we move into year 2, where we are resuming our work with our cohort 1 states on those 8 key components that I just talked about, that would begin in what we would be looking at as year 2. And then you can see in year 3, we would begin with cohort 1 engaging in phase 2. So that would be on-site and virtual monitoring, while cohort 2 is starting their phase 1 activities, which is the pre-site monitoring. So the work around the protocols that are related to the 8 key components of our DMS structure. So it moves through year 4. You can see with each year, it's adding in a cohort that would be beginning a phase. So as cohort 1 is beginning phase 3, we've got cohort 3 beginning phase 1. It moves through to year 5, year 6, year 7, and then by year 8, we would be having cohort 5 beginning phase 3, which is the follow-up and closeout activities that had been identified through phase 1 and phase 2 activities. So in our year 8, all states will have been monitored and we'll be evaluating the process at that point. Next slide, please. So I gave you kind of the large view of what it would look like over the next couple of years. I wanted to spend a little time talking about, well, what does that mean over the next couple of months and over and into next year. So as you can see on the left of this slide, it's talking about quarter 1, January, February, March. So in January, we began working on some of these pivot plan development processes. In February, right now, we're rolling out our DMS pivot, and included in that is really what we're looking at right now, which is this COVID-19 guidance and resource development to support you, the states, figuring out what items you need, what questions you have, what things you're struggling with, and how MSIP can support that work. So those COVID-19 activities kind of continue throughout this year. You'll see it throughout the different milestones within this year. Q2, April, May, June, we're going to be engaging with various stakeholders, some of the states in some of our protocols, getting some feedback on them, revising those as appropriate, and getting that posted and engaging in some technical assistance with you, our states, on what those protocols are and how they might be used by both you and MSIP. And that leads us to Q4, where you can see in the fall of next year, so October 2021, Cohort 1, Phase 1, pre-site activities. We'd be continuing that COVID-19 work and then providing universal TA for all states on DMS 2.0. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So year 2, you can see that we're continuing Cohort 1 pre-site activities in Q1 there. I'm sorry, if you can go back one slide. Thanks. So Cohort 1 pre-site work in January, February. DMS 2.0 Phase 2 will be kind of rolling out what that Phase 2 will look like for states, and again, providing universal TA. And as it goes through each quarter, we're just continuing to build. And you can see in Q3, that's where we're working with Cohort 1 on preparing for Phase 2, which is that on-site virtual monitoring. In Cohort 2, we're going to be getting you ready for those Phase 1 activities that will start in Q4, which is October of 2022. So you can just see that there. So we'll move to the next slide. We wanted to again highlight that we will be scheduling a state-specific call for those states that have been engaged in Cohort 1 activities. Look for a doodle for me on that. We'll get that set up hopefully next week. Our next DMS 2.0 Universal TA call is scheduled for February 25th, and on those calls we'll be rolling out DMS pivot activities, as well as we're going to be highlighting our Osep funded TA centers each month. And this month we have ECTA and Daisy will be presenting on some great resources to help you with your general supervision systems. We'll also be engaging in some COVID-19 related support for states on those calls as well. So look for those each month. They are the 4th Thursday every month at 4 p.m. And moving forward, look for more presentations from our TA providers on various DMS topics, both Part B, Part C, and our preschool programs during our DMS 2.0 universal calls. And next slide, I believe, is questions. So I see there are a bunch in the chat, so I'm going to pull those up so I can begin to read some of these out for Matt, Greg, myself, David, if he's still on. Okay. Part C grant, okay. Is there a cohort list that is available for states? We would like to see when we are assigned.
So we released the list of Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 states prior to, I can't remember whether it was, I think it was probably September of the prior year. We will be releasing the additional cohorts in the near future. If you don't know that you're in Cohort 1 or Cohort 2, it means you're somewhere between Cohort 3 and Cohort 5.
Good. Okay, another question about where the cohorts are posted online. So more information will be coming about that. Again, just to be clear, Cohort 1 is well aware that they are in Cohort 1. Cohort 2, we're notified via email letter. And then if you haven't been notified, that means you're in 3 through 5. Let's see. Do I understand correctly from the slide you showed that phase 2 monitoring for cohort 1 begins in the fall of 2021? No. So if we want to go back 2 slides, I think. I just want to go through this once again to show. One more slide, please. So if you can see on this slide over in Q4, that's October of 2021. So cohort 1 would resume phase 1 pre-site work in October of 2021. So we'll be pausing or, working on some of these other COVID-related resources, supports throughout the next couple of months, and providing you with ample time to be able to review the protocols, see the protocols all throughout this year, and then circling back in the fall to resume phase 1 activities with cohort 1. If you go to the next slide, when we circle back around to Q4 of year 2, you'll see cohort 1 begins phase 2 in October of 2022. So again, we'll be sending this out. We also have a full 8-year cycle that we have built. I didn't want to go through all of those years because it can get a little bit repetitive, but we will be getting that to everyone as well. So you kind of have a roadmap, as this is called, of where we're going and what we're doing. Okay, will Osep plan to define normal operations as it applies to compensatory services in spring of 2020 guidance?
So I think that's the type of issue that we're taking a look at for what additional guidance we can provide. So look forward to more information on that as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the supplemental guidance or areas that we're looking at, in addition to quite a few others. One other question we have, Matt, is what fiscal year will be reviewed for cohort 1? So do you want to talk about what they looked at in this?
For cohort 1, so yeah, I'm just trying to orient myself. So I think the question you're probably asking is there an impact of what the delay will have? So the current review is on the systems that are in place as we speak, but as planned, the phase 2 activities we're going to be looking at implementation. So we know that there are a number of states that are in transition with their fiscal monitoring systems. So we'll be addressing state by state exactly what could be addressed in the letter in terms of a system that was in place when we first touched you through phase 1 monitoring versus what is in place when we complete the phase 2 monitoring. So I would stay tuned for some more information on that and some state-specific issues related to that.
There is one other question that I think you'll probably be able to address. It's not related to the current topic, but they were wondering if the anticipated Part C grant award amounts have been shared with states for the FFY 2021 Part C application. I don't believe they have, but.
The allocations are being finalized. Greg, did you want to mention it? Go ahead.
I think you got started, so why don't you continue?
Yeah, I think the allocations are being finalized. I don't know what the exact timeline is, but I hope that they will be shared relatively soon. Greg, did you have something else?
You took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm going to circle back to our DMS topic. One of the questions is about the review of state policies that we're conducting during our pre-site activities. Will that simply be a review of the website, or is it considered part of discovery? If discovery, how will any areas of non-compliance, will those be addressed?
So I can start that answer. Again, we're going to be providing a lot more detail on this. I think we see the review that we've done of existing policies as a starting point for a conversation with you all about the situation that you're addressing. What kinds of policies and procedures do you have, and how that's being implemented locally? that would be the starting point of our conversation. If there are issues that suggest that there is a concern about non-compliance, we will address that as appropriate from there. But we're going to start with conversations and discussions and clarification just based on what we initially find.
I would also highlight that if you do look back at the previous call we had on the 28th, and I think the one in December as well, we talk a little bit about what those protocol conversations are, what information we'd be looking at during phase 1 versus phase 2, and how we would be dealing with the information that we collect during those discussions. So I would definitely reference back to some of those PowerPoints because it echoes what Matt just shared. Are there other questions? Raise of hands. I don't know. Any that are
We have a few
there.
hands raised. So first, I'll go ahead and call on Wendy Stutt, and I'll ask you to unmute.
Hello there. I don't have a question, but thanks for this great information.
Great.
Thank you.
The next
That was
one,
an easy one.
yeah, the next hand we have raised is from Melaine Shepard. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Hello. Thank you for the information. I actually don't have a question. I must have accidentally hit that hand and I can't figure out if it's raised or not. So sorry about that, but thank you.
All right. And the last one we have is from Mary Demers. Go ahead and unmute you. It's not gonna, it's gonna let me.
Maybe that was an accidental hand raise as well.
Yeah, it's not letting me request to unmute Mary.
Well, perhaps since we are at time, maybe if you do have a question, you can email any of us on this call, Matt or myself, and we can follow up for sure to answer and address any questions that folks have as you take in this information, process it. We definitely know you'll have questions, so reach out to your state leads. They're available to take any questions that you have, and will reach out to us for further guidance if there's anything that they aren't able to address right off the bat. Anything else you want to add, Matt?
Yeah, no, I would just echo what Kate said. Remember that we'll be providing more information on the call on the 25th. If you're asking questions or comments that come in through their state lead, we may use that to inform the information we're providing on the 25th. We're happy to try to address things as we can. So we appreciate everybody's attention. I know we're past time. Thank you all for all that you do out there and for your attention today and for your flexibility as we adjust. Thanks so much.
Lots of appreciation in the chat. So. Thanks, guys.